the beans with Dr. Jill.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of Spill the Beans with Dr. Jill. Very excited to introduce you to today's guest. And before I do, I just want to set the tone for what this series is going to be about. So, Spill the Beans came organically for me after I graduated from New England College. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without the support and the guidance from Dr. Gavin Henning. My dissertation was on vicarious trauma, and ever since it's just kind of been going and evolving. And Beans is my family nickname, and so I'm excited to bring individuals in our discipline and outside into this space to talk kind of candidly about what they've seen in their fields and bring you high experts like today, who is a president of a college, as well as some other individuals. I'm hopeful that when you watch this seminar, I'm going to call it not a podcast, but I'm hopeful that when you hear and feel it, that it would be like if we were having coffee together with some colleagues and friends. So, want to preface that. Thank you so much for joining us. Our first guest, I'm going to have him introduce himself and his magnificent title and expertise.
Hi, Dr. Jill. This is Wayne Lesperance. I'm the president of New England College. This is my third year as president. Before that, I was a professor of political science for 17 years here at the college.
Thank you so much, President. So let me ask you, before talking to you about my research, have you ever heard of vicarious trauma before? And if so, what did that kind of learn and look like for you? And if not, why do you think that was?
I have not. And so I think, now that I understand what it is, I certainly have seen it and experienced it, but the words weren't there for it. So this is interesting for me on an intellectual level. My background is I studied international security, and what that really means is I studied and wrote about power and power relationships. And for political scientists, taking on the role of dispassionate observer is sort of like what you shoot for. You want to be, Mr. Spock, right? When you're considering really awful things that happen in the world. But what really happens is you start to see the effect on the human being, on the individual. And it's hard to remain the dispassionate observer in that context. And perhaps it's even more important that you are. So what you've researched and the language you've provided around it becomes a tool for someone like me to really add depth and meaning to the political phenomena that I was trying to understand better. I mean, everything from human rights violations to violations of international law and things that we think about as a macro. And eventually, if you do this right, you get down to see how human beings, individual human beings, are affected. And I found that to be an empowering tool. It just deepened my understanding of what it is I was trying to think about and write about and understand.
Yeah, I love that. In your role as a college president, what have you observed as far as do you think people are giving a name to the phenomenon? Do you think that some individuals are nurturing each other? And what would you recommend as far as that is concerned?
So I think we need to be much more intentional about the training around this. I think people generally approach with very good intentions, wanting to support. So I'll give you an example. When a Title IX report or a sexual assault report gets to my desk, right? That's a very real thing. I mean, that is one of the hardest pieces of my job. As my team is sort of navigating that, and my first question is, are we taking care of the student, right? Are we taking care of the individual affected? Um, and and I would argue the language is still not there, but the intent is there. The desire to really support a student, really navigate this process in a fair manner, but in a very supportive manner for all parties involved, is there. And so I think there is a disconnect between that intentionality and a more scholarly understanding, I think, or more just a better understanding of what's actually being experienced, right?
Mhm.
And it's not just the victim and the perpetrator. There are the folks that have been witness to it or are affected by it, the roommates, the neighbor down the hall in a residence hall, or the colleague in the office next to yours, that's impacted. Um, so I'm going on a little long on this, but the point is that I think the intentionality is there, but I don't think we have the language, and if we don't have the language, we may not have the enough of the training to really be effective in addressing that kind of a concern.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've been able to, through my trainings, talk to others on how I want this to be part of an academic discipline in a conversation
Yes,
of the professions that we're getting into, whether you're in higher ed or other sectors.
sure.
The byproduct of the job of caring for others is significant, right? So, with that
That's
being
right.
said, I know you've been a president for a couple of years now, you've been in higher ed, you've done other sectors. What do you do for your own self-care? What do you do to manage your vicarious trauma?
Oh. I wish I had a list of best practices I could share with you. I think it's very situational. Different things hit me in different ways, right? Um, you know, like I said, I think, any incident of violence um, hits me probably the hardest. And I sometimes find that processing that, it takes time, and I have to give myself the time for that. So the immediacy of providing good care, good support, that's the first step, right? You've got to feel good that you are responding to the moment. But I think as you get past that first step and you begin to process it, it feels almost selfish, but the taking the time to sort of let yourself navigate it. I do a lot of just sort of note writing, and sort of that's kind of how I process. I write. And then if I go back and read it, I'll think, gee, I wish I had done that differently, or I wish I'd thought of this other piece. And I think that's helpful. It's not beating yourself up as much as it is, okay, so if something like this ever happens again, I want the tools that I don't really have in the moment. Um, I think that's helpful. And I think so. I guess the first piece of advice I would give is give yourself time, but give your colleagues who are also dealing with this the time to process. I think when people are ready, you can't be afraid to talk about it. You need to be intentional about talking about what just happened. How does that impact us? And what do we think? And how can we do this better? Um, I think having external trainers who can come in with their own experiences would be invaluable. I don't know that there's a lot of that. There's crisis response trainers, there's other kinds, but this particular piece, I think that's not nearly as well developed. And so I think you're really onto something here that would be, whether it's part of a program or some sort of a certification or a micro credential, something that you could draw on and have, just another tool in the toolbox that would be very useful. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
No, you
that's
totally did. And it's so interesting that you're saying this because I think it's important for the audience to know that part of this series is organic. We're not rehearsed, we haven't met before.
right.
And one of the things that you said that I love that you said was, to be selfish. And in my training, I literally tell the audience members, this is for you. I need you to be selfish for the next hour or 2 hours that we're together. And I'll give you gems, I'll give you tools that you can give to your staff. But it's so hard that sometimes the professionals are always thinking of how they can move this through their organization instead of just being present with me, that I have to remind them to do that.
Right.
So it's so great that you're mentioning that. So tell me, is there anything that you would want us to know that's going on at New England College or the latest and greatest that you would want us to be aware of?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. We've just finished a strategic planning process. We're finalizing the implementation components. I cannot wait to share that with the community, later on this summer. We are growing at a time when higher ed is struggling on enrollment. We are growing. We've added some new academic programs like artificial intelligence. We've added some athletic programs, track and field, cheerleading, and football, which have been hugely positive for us. What's interesting is that so much of what you are writing about, researching, is a version of talking about community.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I'm very invested in as president is finding ways in which to bring this community together and deepen the sense of community. I am a big fan of the Ted Lasso series, and really what I'm a big fan of is positivity. And so I try to bring that to everything I do. And I think that's one way that you really encourage community, not false positivity, not glossing over tough things,
Mhm.
but bringing positive energy to anything that you're doing, good or bad, to try to help people embrace, to come along. And so there's a cultural change happening at our college, which I find to be really, really encouraging and refreshing. And it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be here.
It's exciting to be an alum and to see that because so many friends and colleagues of mine see their organization having to merge or consolidate. And so it's really inspiring to make sure that everyone understand the commitment it takes for an institution to survive through any kind of challenges. What is one word or one phrase that you would want the audience to know as I ask you to spill the beans?
Boy, in my email signature, there's a Latin expression. It's ut prosim.
Mm.
Ut prosim translates to that I may serve. And that really is my philosophy in life. I want to be of service to others. A good president, a good leader, devotes themselves to making the jobs of everybody that they work with a little bit easier. If I can do that, life's pretty good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you've got it. Thanks for including me. This is exciting, and congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching. Stay tuned for our another series next week.